Good afternoon and welcome to today's Global Fleet Champions webinar on vehicle procurement and maintenance. Global Fleet Champions is a partnership campaign administered by Break the Road Safety charity to prevent deaths, injuries and pollution caused by vehicles driven for work. To learn more about the campaign and what we do, visit globalfleetchampions.org. Today's webinar will discuss what to look for when buying a new vehicle and the technologies that can keep it safe on the road. We will cover what to look for when procuring new vehicles for your fleet, some of the technologies that new vehicles are equipped with and basic maintenance advice for keeping them in safe working order, and examples of how technology can simplify vehicle maintenance procedures. In a minute, we will present you with a multiple choice question poll so we can find out your views on a subject related to procurement and maintenance. It is anonymous. Simply select one answer and press confirm, and we will discuss the results at the beginning of the question and answer session, which is your opportunity to ask today's presenters a question. You can put forward your questions at any time during the webinar by using the chat box on the webinar panel. The poll question will appear on your screen shortly, and the webinar will then begin. Thank you.
So hello, today I wanted to share with you my thoughts about choosing the safest vehicle. Now, we'll start off looking at where vehicle safety fits into the decade of action for road safety, because I think it's important to look at the bigger picture sometimes. We'll touch on the issues with different vehicle types, explore some of the ways of avoiding crashes with collision avoidance technologies, and hear about the new car assessment program and the importance of choosing the high-rated cars. We'll finish off by looking at the implications for the grey fleet and finally explore where vehicle safety fits into the wider work-related road risk management program. Now, in September last year, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution related to improving global road safety, and they proclaimed that 2021 to 2030 would be the decade of action for road safety, with the ambitious target of preventing at least 50% of road traffic deaths and injuries by 2030. So what does that mean for me? Well, you'll see that safe vehicles are one of the cornerstones of the what to do element. Technologies are part of the how to do it, and the private sector, so that's you and I, are one of the key stakeholders responsible for delivering the plan in who does it. So in terms of the bigger picture, the UN are keen for us to do this, and safe vehicles is one of the most important parts of being able to achieve this, especially if you have operations in low and middle income countries. Now, looking at different vehicle types, safety should always be the prime consideration, whatever type of vehicle you're using. Now, I think we tend to think of safety for cars. You know, the new car assessment program, which we'll talk about later, has been around for a few years now. But specifying safe vehicles and safety equipment is valid on all vehicle types, from a motorcycle right through to an HGV. So whilst you can't specify a 5-star rated HGV, you can make sure that the appropriate safety equipment and collision avoidance technology is fitted. And again, we'll talk more about the latter later. Now, whilst it's beyond the scope of this short session to go into any depth here, you should always ensure that the vehicles employees are driving are fit for purpose. And this should take into account things like type and length of journey, weather conditions to be encountered, ergonomics related to perhaps seating position and also loading and unloading in the vehicle. And if loads are going to be carried, how are you going to do that safely? How are they going to be stowed safely in the vehicle? So all of these things should be taken into consideration when we're talking about safety and fitness for purpose. But I want to focus perhaps more on how to avoid being involved in a collision. Now, there's a number of technologies that can help drivers do this. Many of these have been and are being developed as part of the move towards self-driving vehicles. But an important point to remember here is the language we use with drivers. These are just driver aids, and they do not allow anybody to take their eyes off the road or their mind away from the driving task. And that's an important point to make. There's many different technologies available. I'll just give you a couple of examples. Adaptive cruise control. Now that can help drivers keep a safe distance from the vehicle in front. Although there's situations such as adverse weather or when the vehicle in front does a sudden lane change to avoid a stationary object, where the system cannot be relied on. So it's a driver aid. It doesn't allow self-driving. There's steering assist, which can help drivers stay in lane if they start to move over the white line without indicating. But again, this should never be used as an excuse not for taking a break from driving when you're feeling tired. It's not a fatigue management tool, it's a driver aid. There's lane change assist, which can help drivers avoid moving into an occupied lane. Although drivers should always check their blind spots, they shouldn't rely on this technology. And there's other driver assistance technologies out there too, and more will be coming. Now, manufacturers have their own proprietary names for many of these, so confusingly, you'll need to work with your suppliers to understand exactly what collision avoidance systems are available. But perhaps the best known, and the one that's been around for the longest, is autonomous emergency braking. Now, despite the name, this is actually a safety backup. Now, this will engage if the driver doesn't respond to a warning of an obstacle up ahead that they haven't seen. And if they don't respond, the brakes will autonomously apply and emergency braking will result. Now, given that after low-speed maneuvering and glass damage, hitting a third party in the rear is one of the most common insurance claims and one of the costliest, this technology can help reduce both the occurrence of those types of crash and the cost of these, and I'll talk more about that later. Again, it's important to remember that this is a safety backup, and it should not be used as an excuse for the driver to divert their eyes from the road or their mind away from the driving task. It's a driver aid. Moving on to the new car assessment program ratings, we've probably all heard about these. And there's various regional versions under the global NCAP umbrella. Now, these started off rating the safety of cars for drivers and passengers. They later moved on to include pedestrian safety, and most latterly, they've involved collision avoidance technologies. In fact, it's now unlikely that a car will achieve a maximum 5-star rating without having some form of collision avoidance technology. And typically, this will be autonomous emergency braking, which we've just talked about. And I guess a question for all of you to ponder, with so many 5-star NCAP cars available now, why would you allow anything else on your approved list? And it's good to see in Europe, it's not just cars, that vans are starting to be tested now. So from this year onwards, you should be able to choose a safer van based on the NCAP rating. Now, just a couple of words of caution here. Now, the rating system for cars is cars of the same class. And in general, larger cars will perform better in collisions than smaller ones. So you can't necessarily compare a 5-star saloon car with a 5-star city car, for example. The larger typically is the better. But perhaps most importantly, and this is especially relevant if you operate vehicles in more than one country, and especially in low and middle income countries, you can't assume that one make and model of car will have the same NCAP star rating in all the markets it's sold in. Just because a car achieves a 5-star rating in Europe, for example, it might not achieve a 5-star rating in Asia or South America, even though the vehicle may look exactly the same on the outside. It is manufactured using different techniques and materials internally in the skins of the doors, for example, which you can't see because they're manufactured to a budget for the market that they're sold in. So you just need to be very careful there. Moving on to the grey fleet, if you're going to specify collision avoidance technologies or a minimum NCAP rating for your owned or leased vehicles, then you should at least be working towards this for employees using their own vehicles for making work-related journeys, so the grey fleet. Now, obviously, you're going to find it difficult to apply the same standards straight away for existing grey fleet drivers. Although to prevent ongoing lag, perhaps you'd do something different for new starters so they can be subject to more stringent requirements in terms of minimum vehicle specifications. But you should be working towards this and setting a date when any grey fleet vehicle used for making work-related journeys must meet some minimum standards. For example, being 5-star NCAP rated and or fitted with autonomous emergency braking. You should be working towards that. And whilst we're talking about the grey fleet, you shouldn't forget about other vehicles that employees might be using for making work-related journeys. Hire vehicles, courtesy cars. You should be setting minimum safety standards for these as well. So what are the benefits? Well, in real-world rear-end crashes, and this is from a 2015 study carried out jointly by Euro NCAP and Australasian NCAP, they found that cars fitted with autonomous emergency braking were involved in 38% fewer rear-end crashes. 38% fewer. In the UK, Thatcham's analysis of insurance data showed that the Mark 7 VW Golf, which is fitted with autonomous emergency braking as standard, had third-party injury claims that were 45% lower compared to equivalent vehicles in this class, and that included the previous generation Golf, 45% lower. So apart from the obvious safety benefits associated with less crashes, there are some real-world savings to be made here, and this is an important point, as some of you on the call might not have ultimate responsibility for procuring vehicles in your organizations. So health and safety managers, fleet managers, or transport managers, you might have to work with your colleagues in procurement or insurance or wherever those responsibilities lie to look at the bigger picture, to take into account the savings that can be made for your organization rather than just focusing on the purchase price or monthly leasing costs of the vehicle. And this is before the hidden or uninsured losses associated with every collision are taken into account. The International Loss Control Institute say that for every pound or euro or dollar paid out in insurance claims, there are 8 to 53 pounds or euros or dollars of uninsured losses depending on the severity of the incident. It's a really significant issue for your business, these uninsured losses associated with collisions. And from an employee perspective, if you've started to develop your own road safety culture, and I'll touch on this in a minute, then any tax implications related to any higher costs associated with safer vehicles will be easily understood in terms of keeping them and anyone they're traveling with in their vehicle, their friends and their family, as safe as possible. So anyone who's listened to me before will know that it's important to understand where any one aspect of managing driver safety fits into the bigger work-related road risk management program. Now, when we're talking about safe vehicles, this actually starts at the very start of the process in the policy section. But you'll see there's all these other elements, and it's important that you don't focus on any one particular area of this process, because if in doing so, you're going to miss all the benefits and you're unlikely to achieve a sustainable reduction in your collision and claim rates. You have to address all of these different elements. And the two key success factors in any program, assuming that you are addressing all these elements, are management and culture. Now, when I talk about management, I'm not so simply focusing on the importance of management buy-in and support and financing of any fleet safety program, although obviously this is important. I'm mainly talking about how your fleet safety program dovetails into your operating practices and procedures. Because if there's a mismatch here, the safety program is unlikely to take precedence. Now, often when I'm working with a customer, I'll be recommending that they make changes to their operating practices and procedures to create an environment in which employees can drive safely. The on-road safety culture is also critical. Now, I haven't got time today to discuss how you develop that, but what you need to do is create a culture where employees choose to drive safely because they want to, not because they have to. So to sum up, in your road safety policies, always ensure that vehicles used for making work-related journeys, whatever the type and whoever owns them, are fit for purpose. And for cars, have the highest NCAP safety rating possible. There's really no reason why only 5-star rated ones should be specified. Make sure that, as a minimum, all your vehicles have autonomous emergency braking fitted. Any additional costs associated with this will be more than offset by the benefits associated with lower collision rates, especially for one of the most frequent and costliest collision types, hitting a third party in the rear. What would a 45% reduction in third-party injury costs look like on your claims data? If you combine using the safest vehicle possible as part of an effective work-related road risk management program, then you should be able to achieve a significant and sustainable reduction in your collisions, making it safer for your employees and everyone they share the road with. Thank you for your attention.
Good afternoon, my name's Sean Brooks. I'm a Technical Innovations Manager for Autoglass. Thank you for joining the call this afternoon. I'd just like to give you a brief update around vehicle technology and, more importantly, how this affects the fleet industry and also our repairs. So ADAS, Advanced Driver Assist Systems, it's been around for a little while now, as it relies on a number of sensors to monitor the environment around the vehicle. These sensors, if we look at the top right of the slide there, they could be multiple radars fitted to the front bumper. There could be a LiDAR sensor fitted to the headlights or the front grille, and this could also be mounted on the windscreen as well. Sticking with the Mercedes S-Class, we see a stereo ADAS camera fitted, but also augmented reality cameras fitted to the windscreen as well. So that makes it really, really important from a repair perspective to be able to not only recognise that that sensor is fitted, but also the manufacturer's repair methods. If we look at the rear windscreen, we've got also a camera there monitoring the environment behind the vehicle. And this is designed to primarily pick up on emergency vehicles, warn the driver and give them the early heads up that something is coming along behind. And also on the rear bumper, as you can see there, we'll also see some rear mounted radars. So advancements in this technology come from two main areas in the glass industry at the moment. And as you can see on the screen there, heads-up display is a really prominent one for us here at Autoglass. So heads-up display technology, it's nothing new. It's been around for a number of years. But what we are beginning to see is huge developments in terms of how the actual technology is delivered onto the windscreen. So historically, a heads-up display might just display the road speed on the glass. It's a fairly static display. What we're beginning to see now is much more area of the windscreen included. So the projected image is a lot bigger. It's a lot more dynamic, so it moves around, but it's also taking in information from all of those ADAS sensors that we've just referred to in terms of the cameras and the radars. So it's linking in to the lane assist systems, and it's able to put that information onto the windscreen along with traffic signs and also ghost sat-nav trails. And that's particularly evident when we're talking about augmented reality. So Mercedes-Benz, in most of their models, have within their user experience in the satellite navigation, uses a windscreen-mounted camera that monitors the environment in front of the car and enhances that image with computer-generated graphics. So as we can see on the slide there, you've got those blue floating halos, which is giving the driver clear indication of an oncoming turning. All that information is coming from a windscreen mounted camera working alongside the ADAS camera. And on the right hand side there, we've got an example for an S-Class Mercedes, which incorporates the heads-up display. As we can see, that green halo is taking distance information from the front mounted radar, from the adaptive cruise, and also the lane assist markings as well. Other technologies, again, rain sensor, nothing particularly new, but from a safety aspect, it's absolutely critical that a rain sensor is working functionally and correctly, because fundamentally an ADAS camera is a vision-based sensor, and it's there to, as I said, observe the road ahead, recognize lane markings and traffic signs, and if that's got blurred vision because of perhaps warm wipers, or perhaps because the wipers aren't turned on quick enough if it starts to rain, then the safety system is impaired at that point. So other technologies that we're seeing at the moment in terms of an increase, I've mentioned rain sensor, I've mentioned augmented reality cameras and heads up, but we're also seeing an increase in acoustic glass and also heated glass as well. And all of this technology is really kind of having an impact on where we can repair. So if there's a chip repair on the windscreen, it's reducing the repairable area, following manufacturers' guidance in terms of where's safe to repair and where's not. So as I said, the ADAS sensors are there. They are observing the road ahead. They're looking for traffic signs, lane markings, pedestrians, as well as cyclists. They need a clear view of the road ahead. It's typically a camera mounted to the windscreen, and if, as I said, if the wipers are not clearing the windscreen, potentially that's going to have a knock-on effect to the function of the system. Also as well, if there's a chip or a crack going across the camera's view, that's also going to have a knock-on effect of how well those safety systems actually function. We can't also rely on malfunction indicators on the instrument cluster. So there is a real myth in the industry that if there's no light on the dash, there is no problem in terms of all these ADAS sensors working. Well, put quite simply, a camera or a radar doesn't know that it's misaligned. From electronics diagnostics perspective, it's still working and it's still carrying out its correct function. It doesn't necessarily know that it's looking in the wrong area. So it's vital that any repairer follows the OE repair methods and working with trusted experts such as Autoglass. So in terms of the compliance, what is the risk of not completing recalibration? Well, what we see on screen here is some testing that Belron commissioned back in 2019. And it follows Euro NCAP AEB test standards for emergency brake systems. And it's a Toyota CHR. So this particular car is equipped with ADAS. It's got a windscreen mounted camera and a bumper mounted front radar. And what the test done was, it was a robotically controlled vehicle. There was a driver in there just for emergency stop purposes. But what that robot enabled us to do is basically send that car down the track and ensure consistency of a run. So every single time that car was coming down in exactly the same position, exactly the same speed, exactly the same steering input, throttle input as the previous runs. On the left-hand side, what you'll see is correctly recalibrated. The car recognises the target, warns the driver and stops before impact. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that the car recognises the object, warns the driver, but it all happens way too late. So there's a considerable impact in terms of how well and how quickly the systems react and warn the driver and bring the vehicle safely to a halt. So compliance is absolutely critical and recalibration is really, really important. So just by way of summary, ADAS technology fitment is increasing. The complexity of not only diagnostics, but also recalibration in repair and in the fleet industry is a key challenge. And that's really, really important to work with branded experts such as Autoglass and Belron around the rest of the world. Recalibration, as I've just shown with the videos, is absolutely critical to the correct repair and correct function of recalibration systems. And our vehicle coverage, we consider it to be market leading at 99.4% of all vehicles covered. That's everything from me. Should you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the notes and we will answer them.
Hello and good afternoon. I'm Chris Woods, Enterprise Sales Director at TrackMate. I'm going to take just a few moments to talk about how we can help harness connected vehicle data, gain insights to driver and vehicle behaviour, and help drivers reduce risk and stay compliant. At TrackMate, we use telematics data to stream data from vehicles to our servers, where it is then normalised, as most operators run a variety of makes and models across fleet, and then made available via data streams to partner systems and or to TrackMate's user interface portals and variety of apps. So questions asked, what is wrong with the vehicles in this picture? And the answer is, we don't know, unless that is, we use connected data to get an insight. So for example, this particular vehicle is over its declared mileage. This can have a knock-on effect on costs upon return as it affects residual values. Knowing this in advance helps fleets and lease companies mitigate this. This particular vehicle requires a service. For fleet operators, it's handy to know this in advance so we can create advanced notifications. And this vehicle is displaying a brake fault light. Now in our expertise, not all drivers necessarily relay this information back, at least not in a timely manner. And so real-time notifications such as this help fleet operators fix issues much sooner, keeping the fleet safer and compliant. We also use the telematics data to retrieve other data sets, including first notification of loss, which is essentially crash events. We analyse and profile each driver's behaviour and their effect on both safety and efficiency, and road and operational data using GPS to trace journeys. So focusing specifically on the data sets we can retrieve from the vehicle, the first is the VIN number. So this is the first thing that we retrieve when a device is connected. This helps us understand the vehicle we are fitted to, such as the make, model, the year, whether it's petrol, diesel, hybrid, or a battery electric vehicle. And this is to understand the characteristics and which of the additional data sources that we've got listed are retrievable. The true odometer from the dashboard. This is how we help manage service and maintenance, as well as lease management of vehicles. Dashboard warning lights. We can read these from pretty much most cars across Europe and feed that back in real time. A good example of this use case is through our partnership with the AA, where this data is being streamed back to the control centers within a product called Smart Breakdown, which uses TrackMate technology to harness the vehicle connected data to mitigate breakdowns or provide a smooth and efficient service should one occur. Diagnostic trouble codes, otherwise known as fault codes, are exactly that, where the vehicle's computer has identified a fault, and real-time access to these allows fleet operators to determine if immediate action is required to maintain the safety and efficiency of the vehicle. Fuel levels. There's lots of benefits in knowing about fuel usage across the fleet, not only if fuel is going missing, but also to assess real-life MPGs for future fleet acquisition decisions and identifying issues of discrepancies between similar vehicles. With that information, you can understand whether that's down to driver behaviour or whether there's in fact mechanical issues. For tyre pressure monitoring systems, these have been standard since 2012 on European vehicles. So not only can we read from the vehicle's dashboard if there are any issues with tyres, we can also understand information such as tyre temperatures and pressures. Condition-based service alerts. As I've mentioned previously, we can create alerts in advance if a service being due. That's either by time and date, or by mileage. AdBlue and DPF are all to do with emissions and are two things that are widely misunderstood by drivers, though if they're left unmanaged, can or will result in vehicles not being able to start. And so with insights gained from TrackMate devices, fleet operators can reduce any unnecessary VOR days. Battery state of health. The number one issue across OEM battery claims comes from flat batteries. The reason being that the battery is central to the vehicle electric system. So anything else that goes wrong on the vehicle, the battery suffers and could cause a non-start. We have a patented algorithm that can actually predict when the battery is going to fail. So again, helps reduce any unnecessary VOR days. And finally, the battery state of charge. As more fleets transition to battery electric vehicles, knowing how that battery is operating is critical to planning and usage. A good reference case for how TrackMate technology can help fleets gain the upper hand on creating safer and more efficient fleets will be to look at Autoglass, who have achieved significant improvements across the board on a disparate fleet of over 1,000 technician vans across the country. We'll now look at vehicle checks. So vehicle checks are often carried out on paper, and the big challenge and problem behind that is the delay in reporting of issues. That's if they're received at all. By digitizing the vehicle checks, it allows fleet operators, servicing and maintenance teams to know of issues as soon as they're reporting. TrackMate's vehicle checks is a simple app that's available in both the iOS and Android store, so it can be used on a simple smartphone. And the driver can be led through a series of specific checks that the fleet operator would like them to review. Additionally, within the same app, the drivers can capture any incident and accident reporting. So this takes the stress away, or this reduces the stress in what is usually a rather stressful situation where the driver can capture all key information in a single location, and it's all captured digitally, which can be instantly reported back to the fleet operator. Fleet operators can then retrieve this information in the user interface and identify any issues that need assessing straight away, and can make a decision on whether certain issues will deem the vehicle roadworthy or not. Our vehicle checks can be customized as well, so we can have different vehicle checks depending on different vehicle types across the fleet, whether this be new vehicles that are coming onto fleet, or in the instance shown, it could be if there is electric vehicles on fleet where the checks are slightly different. We've seen some great use cases of the customization side of the application. One example of this would be during the COVID pandemic, where customers would start to introduce specific COVID checks, such as PPE, and if the vehicle's been sanitized and cleaned, but additionally start to introduce checks not just on the vehicle, but actually on the driver as well, especially when a lot of fleet operators were working from home and maybe not having that interface with the drivers as regularly. It's essentially allowed them to keep that touch point with the driver and make sure that the driver and everything is okay on the vehicle. And just lastly, just to showcase that we have a number of different devices that we can apply to vehicles. Again, the best device for the best use case, and this can vary from simple self-fit, easy to install, easy to plug in and self-install devices, right the way through to professionally hardwired devices that can include integrated camera technology, and as we mentioned, driver feedback. Thank you for your time and for joining us this afternoon.
That concludes the presentation section of today's webinar. A huge thank you to our speakers. I'm pleased to say all three have joined us today for the question and answer session, which we will start shortly. But first, we'll look at the results of today's poll question. To start this webinar, we asked you whether the global semiconductor chip shortage has affected your organization's vehicle procurement. Hopefully the results on your screen now are showing that it's a fairly even split between people saying significantly, slightly, or not at all, at 27% each, and then 20% also saying that they don't know whether this has had an effect on their organization's ability to procure new vehicles. So I'm pleased to say we're joined by Andy, Chris, and Sean. You should be able to unmute yourselves now. What are your thoughts on these figures and this crisis more in general? How have you seen it impacting on fleet procurement? Sean, it seems we're getting some background noise from your computer. I'm trying to fix it in a minute. Chris or Andy, do you have any comments on that?
It's Andy here. I'll start on that. Well, obviously the newer vehicles tend to be the ones with more of the collision avoidance technology fitted. So I guess if there is a delay in the supply of these vehicles, then it's going to delay them getting onto the fleet. I guess also potentially the older vehicles are being used. There may be a temptation by some people to perhaps not do the preventative maintenance or routine servicing because they know the vehicles are going to be returned, and obviously that increases the risk that they're going to be involved in a breakdown, which puts the vehicle occupants at risk. So there are some issues there, but obviously because vehicle safety is only one small part of the much wider risk management program, as I talked about earlier, then obviously it doesn't stop anybody doing all of the other things necessary for managing the safety of their fleet. So I don't think it's going to have too much effect. It's just going to perhaps delay the adoption of some of these newer technologies.
Great, thank you for that answer. You mentioned just then, and in your presentation as well, Andy, about creating a road risk management program. We have some time now at the question and answer session. Would you care to go in a little more detail about that and how organizations can go about doing it?
Well, that is the biggest question of all, because there's obviously many elements to an effective work-related road risk management program. So if I just start with the sort of two things that need to be in place, and I did mention them both for any effective program. So we clearly haven't got time to go into the detailed level. But when I talk about management, you've got to have your managers on board. You've got to have management support. Managers have got to be seen to be driving safely. The worst thing you can do is invest some time and effort and money into developing a work-related road risk management program, and then your managing director is seen driving out of the car park on his or her telephone. It's just not going to get taken seriously. But perhaps the bigger issue is I see so many organisations who've got some on paper what look like good fleet safety policies, good safe driving policies, but the drivers, the employees, don't get an opportunity to put these things into practice, because operationally there's pressure on them from their manager. There's expectations from other parts of the business that they're going to drive a certain way. So just as a very simple example, if the safe driving policy says don't break the speed limit, which of course it should do, don't drive for too long, and then if there's pressure to make sort of 150 drops in a day for a delivery driver, then there's going to be a tendency for them to do what's required operationally rather than what's required from a safety perspective. And the way I look at it in very simple terms is that how is that employee going to get into most trouble? Are they going to get into most trouble by not following the safety rules, or are they going to get into the most trouble by not hitting their operational metrics? And generally, it's operations always wins out. So when a driver is faced with a decision, do I do the safe thing or do I do what's required from an operational perspective? 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, whatever it is, they'll do what's required operationally, probably take risks and increase their chance of being involved in a collision. So that's got to be right. And when I talk about safety culture, it's developing an on-road safety culture, and it doesn't really matter what the safety culture is in your organization. You may have a strong safety culture in your organization, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to extend out onto the road. Because driving is a very emotive issue. Everyone thinks they're great drivers, and you've got to get to a situation through your communication strategy, through consistency in management approaches to your fleet safety program. You've got to get into a position where employees choose to drive safely, not because you're making them, but because they want to. And obviously that takes a long time to develop. But again, it's that consistency of messaging and management approach to the fleet safety program that's going to gradually sort of build that up. So that doesn't answer your question in detail, because we certainly haven't got time to do that, but hopefully that gives you a flavor of some of the key things that need to be in place for whatever program you decide to implement to make that a success.
Great, thanks Andy, that was very informative. Moving on to a question for Chris now. We have one from an attendee saying they've been experiencing some trouble with keeping vehicles regularly maintained due to the pressures that have been come onto them due to the COVID pandemic. Do you think there are benefits to taking a more data-led approach to vehicle maintenance, and if so, what are these?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a different type of pressure, I think, that everybody's been facing with the pandemic, and there's no doubt that service cycles have had to be have suffered because of that a lot of the time, because of availability, because of the now we're seeing the sort of the shortfall in having the ability to get vehicles serviced and a backlog of MOTs, etc. Fundamentally, there is a legal and compliant requirement to have the vehicle serviced, which obviously the government stepped in and sort of pushed those back at the time. But there's a lot of fleets that sort of have interim checks as well, that they don't just rely on the sort of what they're told to do, that they'll implement regular checks, whether that's introducing 6 monthly checks, regular checks of vehicles. But obviously what we're talking about is using data from the vehicle to identify if there is an issue on the vehicle at the time, being able to understand what that issue is and make a decision at that point whether that fault or that issue on the vehicle can delay a trip to the garage, or whether that is fundamentally that vehicle needs to be taken off the board. So we definitely back the fact of using data to inform the importance of servicing vehicles that ultimately need it, because they could go on to break down, or there could be a costly repair at the end of it. So yeah, we're very much supportive of that approach.
Thank you, Chris. We had a question now that I believe was for Sean, but I think we've lost him in the webinar now. But if either of you, Andy or Chris, feel able to weigh on this, please do. It was, how important is driver education in car and out? I believe this is in relation to having driver-led checks on a vehicle, but if that's not correct, please clarify that for me, and we'll make sure we get commented on it correctly. But yeah, how important is driver education in car and out for performing maintenance and regular checks?
So it's Andy here. I've got some observations on that. So I think there's a tendency for everyone to assume that a driver will know all the different features and where all the different things are on their vehicle. But it's interesting to see that the first time somebody has to open the bonnet in an emergency, you know, they need to top up with wiper fluid, for example. They're scrabbling around looking for actually where the bonnet release catch is. So, and if they've done that, you know, when's the last time they checked the oil? I guess would be a question. So I think there definitely is a role for education, whether that lies with the organisation supplying the vehicles or whether that's a fleet manager responsibility. I'm not sure. I worked with one pharmaceutical company quite a few years ago now, and the fleet manager there would physically take the driver out to the vehicle before handing them the keys, to him or her the keys, to make sure that they knew where, you know, how to adjust the seat, you know, where the bonnet release catches, you know, what fluids that they need to be checking and changing. How to check the tire pressures in their car. So I think that there is a role for that, and I guess as vehicles get more complex, potentially there's a need for drivers to understand how the different systems on their vehicle work. Now, I guess the good thing about some of the collision avoidance technology is that they happen in the background. The driver doesn't need to know how they work, just the fact that they do work. But I think there definitely is a role for raising awareness, if nothing else, with the drivers about some of the things that they need to be looking at in their vehicle.
Yeah, I think I echo what Andy says there. I think it all comes down to, first and foremost, it's the sort of culture. It's also that difference between what is a driver and what is somebody who drives for work, because often people whose actual task or the work that they do is actually once they get to a site, then the vehicle is often seen as that sort of that mode of transport. It's not that they're a particular driver, whereas maybe a professional driver you can expect to be a bit more knowledgeable about what they should do and look after their vehicle. So it comes down to the culture, and we're lucky enough to work with similar customers to what Andy said, that do actually go through that educational process with the drivers if there's new technology on all new vehicles as they're coming through. So it's vitally important.
Okay, we've had a follow-up from this questioner. They're saying, interesting response and quite true. What about driver coaching? How important is that?
Well, driver coaching depends what we mean by that. I take it to mean around the driver's behaviour, so how the driver is operating on business journeys, how they're driving. So we obviously, telematics, a fundamental part of our solutions is profiling that driver and that driver's behaviour, offering that driver feedback on that behaviour, and then offering the fleet operator a way of looking at the fleet holistically to judge what are the standards, what's the benchmarks for the fleet, and to be able to judge maybe the drivers that need more help and assistance to improve against the better drivers in the fleet. We have tools that either an app-based tool that the drivers can dip in and out of and look at their performance, look at their journeys, with some helpful hints and tips on how to improve, or they can have literally in life, in vehicle feedback that gives them some instant feedback based on their driving behaviours that we're collecting from the telematics device. So we see driver coaching as a critical part of making the fleet safer and also making it more efficient.
I think the thing I would say about driver coaching, it certainly has a role to play, but the first thing anybody needs to understand is the underlying root cause of why the driver needs coaching. Is that some as Chris has just been saying, is that some output from the telemetry data? Is that from their collision history? Is that from the fact that they're getting regular sort of speeding tickets? You need to understand why that is occurring, because if the underlying reason is something at an operational or management level, then you can provide as much coaching as you like, but that driver is still going to be speeding if they have to speed to achieve a business objective. So it's understanding what the root cause is. Once you understand what the root cause is, then you can, if coaching's appropriate, you can target the coaching to that area rather than provide some sort of generic coach. So it has a role to play, but don't assume just because someone on paper looks like a bad driver that coaching is the answer. It may be part of the solution, but you always need to look at possible underlying management root causes and sort that out first, if you like, to create an environment in which employees can drive safely. Then the challenge is getting them to drive safely, but always do the management stuff first.
Great, thank you very much. Question here then again for Chris. Does the tracking offered by TrackMate have to be connected via CAN bus to obtain the vehicle data shown in the presentation?
Well, ultimately, yes, we need to connect to the vehicle in order to retrieve that information. There is levels of information we can give by not connecting to the vehicle, because there is elements that can be done actually on the device. So, for example, driver behaviour and speeding incidents can actually be collected on the device. We've got accelerometers on the device. They can work that stuff out. But if we're wanting to understand the rich information from the vehicle, then ultimately we need a conduit to retrieve that data. So we collect that through the, as you mentioned, the CAN bus, which basically broadcasts this information for us to get at.
Okay, thanks. I think we have one last question here. Maybe intended for Sean, but he's still not been able to rejoin us, it seems. So I'll put it out to the two of you again. What are your thoughts on using OEM, that's original equipment manufacturer equipment, versus non-OEM features in vehicles? Is there the potential for maintenance-related challenge if you're using aftermarket features for your vehicles? It's okay. I'm sorry about that. We'll put that question to Sean and we'll see if we can get an answer for you via email later on. Okay, well, that is all the questions we have for today. I just want to say another huge thank you to our speakers, Andy, Chris, and Sean, for their presentations and for joining us in the Q&A session today. As always, it is much appreciated. And of course, to you all for attending today's webinar. We hope you found it informative and engaging. If you'd like to continue the conversations we've had, you can do so on social media, on our Twitter page, or on the Global Fleet Champions LinkedIn as well. The recording of today's webinar will be uploaded to our Break YouTube channel in the next couple of days, and as well will be made available on the Global Fleet Champions website, so you can access it there if you wish to view it again in the future. Okay, thank you again for joining us today. We hope you enjoy the webinar. It will now conclude.